hello once again. How's it going? Welcome to another Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So yeah, we've decided to go ahead and talk about it. If you are also drawn to true crime and want to feel better about your own makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every other Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. So yeah, how's it going? Hope things are going well, and hoo boy, I hope you're ready for today's case. Now, quick forewarning with today's case, the murder itself that we're talking about is very gruesome. Won't be going into like graphic details or anything like that, but just like the general facts and details of this case are pretty gruesome. One of the victims in this case was a pregnant woman, and her baby was also a victim in today's case. So yeah, just be forewarned about that. I know some people can get a little iffy about, hearing about true crime that involves like children or babies or something. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there. Today, we will be talking about the case of the Dardeen family, an entire family murdered. Now, the main thing people talk about in regards to this case, in addition to the, gruesome, just awful facts of it, is the debate of whether or not this crime is solved. We'll get all into it, don't you worry. But yeah, there are some people who argue, no, this case has been solved, we know who the killer is, and like, it's fine. It's just not like officially, solved. It's still officially open. Whereas other people are like, nah, I'm not really buying that, this person is the killer. I think there's, still a question mark on, who murdered this family. It's just, it's a lot to wrap your mind around in this case. I'm left with a huge question. I honestly don't know if this case has been solved, and I'm curious to hear what you all think about it. And real quick before we jump right into it, so I know that I get a lot of case suggestions in the comments, and I don't know what's been going on, but I know YouTube has been really just weird with a lot of people. There's been a couple of people who have said like their comments have been deleted or their accounts restricted or something, so I'm not sure what's going on. But I've decided, you know what? I'll just create like a generic email, so that way if you have a case suggestion you want to shoot my way or something like that, you can go ahead and just, shoot me an email. So if you just want to email a case suggestion my way and you're worried about like the comment being deleted or maybe me not seeing it or something, go ahead and email crystalskyyt@gmail.com. So it's crystalskyyt, obviously YouTube, @gmail.com. And yeah, I figured that way there's like a way to communicate with me, like directly to make sure I get like your case suggestion. I don't know if I'll respond to emails of case suggestions or something, maybe just like a quick like, hey, thanks, I'll add it to the list, and maybe not more than that. But yeah, just wanted to throw that your way and let y'all know I've created an email just for this channel. Now, with all of that said and done, let's dive into this case, the Dardeen family. So yeah, as per usual, we're starting off with the victims and relaying some facts and stuff that I found about them. One thing I was not able to find out about this case is sort of like how the Dardeens met. Keith and Elaine are the couple that we will be talking about today. So yeah, I just have some facts about them and then just sort of like their life together. Not really sure like how they met or anything. But yeah, we'll get all into it. So yeah, let's start off. So Russell Keith Dardeen was born June 22nd, 1958 to Joanne Sharp Dardeen and Russell William Dardeen. He would actually go by his middle name Keith. So his first name was actually Russell, but he went ahead and went by his middle name Keith, so that's how we'll be referring to him. He was raised and I think born in Mount Carmel, Illinois, and he also had a sister named Anita. And that's kind of all I know about Keith's upbringing. Not sure, where he went to school or anything like that. But let's go ahead and move on to who would be Keith's wife. She was born Ruby Elaine Cowling, and she had been born on August 10th, 1957 in Fairfield, Illinois. Her parents were Inez Pointer Cowling and Lee Cowling. She also had two brothers named Bruce and Barry, along with a sister named Julie. And like with Keith, she would go by her middle name. So her first name was Ruby, but she actually went by Elaine. Now, Elaine was primarily raised in Albion, Illinois. And kind of like with Keith, don't really know a whole lot about her upbringing. And yeah, like I said in the beginning, not quite sure how the couple met or anything like that. I just know that they eventually met and married. And they married on July 19th, 1979 at Mount Olive Church. Now, after they got married, Keith worked for the city of Mount Carmel. And here he was a Class A water operator. And he did this job for about 6.5 years. He was a graduate of a water operator course there at Wabash Valley College. Or maybe it's Wabash Valley College, excuse me. Now, the couple would end up having a son, and they named him Peter Sean Dardeen, and he had been born on July 5th, 1984 in Evansville, Indiana. It is said that he really loved swinging on his swing set. The Dardeens had a, little swing set, a little, playground thing in their yard, and he loved swinging on the swing set. And he also referred to his mother as Wayne because he couldn't really say Elaine. In 1986, Keith got a job as a treatment plant operator, and this was at the Rend Lake Water Conservatory District's nearby facility, located in Ina, Illinois, which is a very, very tiny town of about 460 people at the time of the events of today's case. So super, super tiny town. Keith had been employed by the district's inner city water system, and he had actually completed some sort of certified work training, course and certifications in order to get this new job. And at the time of the events of today's case, Keith had worked here for approximately 2.5 years. Larry Foster was Keith's manager at the plant, and he described him as a, quote, a very dependable worker, a very fine young man, very punctual. So when they moved to this area around Ina, the couple bought themselves a trailer, and they ended up living right outside Ina, along Illinois 37, just south of the town. And the couple also brought with them their 2 Labrador retrievers, who would usually be kind of tied up out back. Now, the land that this trailer sat on, so the Dardeens owned the trailer, they bought it, and then they rented the land that it sat on from an older couple, the Settles, Joanne and Lloyd. And after they had been settled in, Elaine got a job as a secretary/bookkeeper in Mount Vernon, and she was employed by Davenport Office Supply, which was owned by Jim Davenport, and she had been working there for approximately 7 months at the time of the events of today's case. And I guess I just thought this was super cute. On her 30th birthday, Peter walked around the town square in Mount Vernon and inside the office supply store with a birthday sign. And it read, "My mommy is 30 today. Happy birthday, Wayne." Because remember, he couldn't say Elaine, so that's what he called her, was Wayne. I just thought that was super cute. So yeah, that was the Dardeen family. It's where they lived. And they just seemed, like they all do, just a normal, average, happy family. Claudia Johnson was the owner of the CJ's New and Used store in Ina. And she said of the Dardeens, quote, "If I could say anything that really summed up this family, they were a nice couple." She said she would see Elaine and Peter at least once a week in the store shopping. And she spoke about how the Dardeens had come to Ina's fall festival. It was this big, kind of community festival that they had to celebrate fall and Halloween time. And there was a costume contest part of this festival. And the Dardeens had actually won 2 years in a row. They won the fall festival's costume contest in 1986 and 1987. And the first time they had won, the little family, Elaine, Keith, and Peter, had shown up as characters from Wizard of Oz, with Elaine as the Cowardly Lion, Keith as the Tin Man, and Peter as the Scarecrow. Yeah, and you can see the picture. They're super adorable. And then in 1987, when they had won, the family came dressed as Ghostbusters. And it just seemed they were just a sweet, happy little family. Mary Payne worked and at one time owned Ina's Country Market, and she said the Dardeens were in there at least 2 or 3 times a week. Quote, "I didn't think you could have a more devoted family." The couple were also said to be active in their local church. It was a small Baptist church called Spring Garden Community Church, and it was located 2 miles east of Ina. And it is said the couple were both musically active in the church's musical ensemble, with Elaine on the piano and Keith doing vocals. Their pastor, Marvin Musgrave, spoke about just how everyone was drawn to the family because they were just super sweet, nice, happy family, people that just put you in a good mood because they're just, happy, good people. That's how he described this couple. Quote, about everybody seemed to be awfully attracted to them. They were just a family you could like. They weren't the type of person that you'd think would have enemies. They were soft-spoken. I never even heard them talk loud. It is said Keith also offered to help with, like, the youth at the church. And in 1987, the couple found out they were expecting. Yes, they were expecting a second baby. And they decided that if it was a girl, they were going to name her Casey Elaine. And if it was a boy, his name was going to be Ian. I don't know if they'd come up with a middle name yet, but yeah, they knew for sure that his name would be Ian if it turned out to be a boy. And it said the couple were very excited for this new addition to their family, and the baby was due in January of 1988. In fact, the couple was so excited about the impending baby number 2 that for Peter's 3rd birthday, they gave one of his gifts, his birthday gifts. They wrote on the little like to and from tag, they wrote, quote, "Happy birthday, big brother," from January 10th. So with baby number 2's imminent arrival and the local area, the local county in general, growing a bit too violent for Keith's liking, Keith and Elaine decided to put their trailer up for sale. According to Keith's mother, Joanne, the plan was going to be for the couple to move back to Mount Carmel. She said her son had regretted moving to Ina, moving to Jefferson County, and he just thought the whole area had grown a bit too violent for his liking. There had actually been 15 homicides in Jefferson County in 2 years. So yeah, he was a little unsettled by that. Joanne said, quote, "It was odd. We'd usually end up talking about murders. I know you might think that's crazy, but me and him were really into about a lot of murder cases, and things happening to people." And she said when she saw him last, which would be the weekend before the events of today's case, he told her that they would be moving back by January after the baby had been born. Quote, he said there's just too many things happening down here. A friend of Keith's said that after a local 10-year-old girl was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered in May of 1987, he grew even more fearful and paranoid for his family. It is reported that there was one night where a woman came knocking on the Dardeen's trailer door. I think she needed to, make a phone call or something. There was never any really context surrounding that, just that a woman knocked on the door of the Dardeen's trailer and needed to make a phone call or something. But Keith, was so protective and distrustful that he just told her, no, I'm sorry, I can't let you in. I can't help you. You got to go find help somewhere else. That's how on edge he was. The Dardeens would last have contact with their family on the evening of Monday, November 16th, 1987. And this would be when Elaine would phone her mother in Browns, which is near Albion, to inform her that the family had made the 75-mile trip back from visiting Keith's mother, Joanne. The family would last be seen by locals, their neighbors and those in their community, on the evening of the next day, Tuesday, November 17th, between 5 and 6 p.m. And it would be on the same Tuesday evening of November 17th, 1987, when the whole family would meet an awful fate and they would all be brutally murdered. So Elaine, who was only 30 years old and about 7 to 7.5 months pregnant, was beaten to death. And she was beaten so ferociously, guys, and so viciously that she actually went into premature labor with baby girl Casey. And Casey was a tiny, premature newborn who only weighed 3 pounds and 13 ounces when she was also brutally beaten to death. And little Peter, who was only about 3 to 3.5 years old, would also meet the same fates as his mother and sister, and he too was beaten to death. And this attack would happen in the Dardeen's trailer, in their own home. And interestingly enough, I just thought this was an interesting detail to add. Remember when I said the family had 2 Labrador retrievers that they kept out back? The dogs were not harmed at all, and I'm unclear if the dogs even barked or anything like that. I just thought that was an interesting fact that they had 2 dogs locked up in the backyard. But I didn't see anything about, the dogs being attacked, the dogs barking, neighbors hearing the dogs barking. So just thought that was an interesting fact to add in. Now, when Keith failed to show up to work the next evening, Wednesday, November 18th, eyebrows were immediately raised by his coworkers. He had always been reliable, always. And if he was going to be late or he was going to call out sick, he always called his supervisors, and nobody had heard from him. In fact, he hadn't even come in that past Monday to pick up his paycheck. So now when he, hasn't picked up his paycheck and now he's not showing up on Wednesday, right, for a shift, there's some eyebrows being raised. Now, it said they tried calling Keith at home, of course, and they got no answer. Other articles stated that Keith's supervisor actually drove over to the Dardeen's trailer and knocked, but he didn't receive an answer, and the front door was locked, so, he didn't let himself in or anything like that. And then other reports state after they couldn't get a hold of Keith, his work, then decided to call his parents. Now, Keith's parents were divorced, but they both still lived in Mount Carmel, and I'm wondering if maybe they were, like, on his list of emergency contacts or something like that. Because, you know, you'd think Elaine would be, but, like, yeah, they couldn't get a hold of Elaine either. I wonder if he had, like, his parents' contact information, and that's why they decided to try them. So when Keith's work called up his parents, they hadn't heard from their son either, and they couldn't think of any reason why he would be missing work. There was nothing planned. He wasn't sick as far as they knew, so they had no answers. And I'm not sure if Keith's work maybe called his dad first, because other articles state that Keith's father then drove over to Joanne's house, and at that time, Keith's sister, Anita Knapp, was over having dinner with her mom and her sons, and he went over there and asked if they had spoken to him, so I didn't know if it was just Keith's work that had contacted his father, but either way, yeah, he drove over to Joanne's, asked if she had seen him. She hadn't seen him. She didn't know what was going on. And Joanne knew something was immediately off. She was like, this isn't like Keith at all. And she decided to phone up the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. So it was around 5:30 p.m. when Joanne called, and she made plans for police to meet Keith's father, Bill, at the Dardeens' trailer, because Bill had a key and he would allow them to make entry to conduct a welfare check. So once Keith's father, Bill, and authorities arrived at the Dardeen trailer right outside Ina, it was around 6 p.m. that Wednesday, deputies opened the trailer door with the key that Keith's father had, and made their way to the back of the trailer. And in the bedroom, in the back, all lying in the waterbed, they found Elaine, Peter, and baby Casey. They were all tucked into bed, lying next to one another, and they were all dead and bloodied and battered. Elaine had been bound and gagged with duct tape, and they also found the murder weapon that had killed them. It was an aluminum baseball bat that had blood on it, and it was in the bedroom with them. It had actually been a gift to Peter from his father for his past birthday. Elaine and Peter each were struck very hard twice in the head, and baby Casey was struck once, and all three died of skull fractures. As police made their way through the home and inspected the crime scene, they discovered that the back door to the trailer was open, and I was unclear if they meant like physically open or just like unlocked. And interestingly enough, the police also found a very small amount of marijuana inside the home. However, later autopsies would reveal no drugs or alcohol in Elaine or Peter's systems. They would also eventually discover with an autopsy that the attacks had likely taken place about a day before they had been discovered. They also could find no instances of forced entry. No broken glass, no broken locks, or anything like that. So of course, right, with the wife and the children being found, murdered, right? No forced entry. And Keith's red 1981 Plymouth vehicle missing. What do you think police assumed? I mean, what would you assume, right? They assumed Keith had attacked his family. They sent out bolos and press releases saying that they were looking for Keith and that he was a suspect in his family's death and that they really needed to talk to him. The State Division of Criminal Investigation from the Illinois State Police joined the Jefferson County authorities in searching for Keith. They were actually working the homicide angle, while Mount Carmel Police Chief Dan DeWitt said that they were focusing on the search for Keith. And I think it's because he was from there, so they were like, you know, he announced that they were searching, like, all the city for Keith, and I think kind of like, maybe not taking the lead in the search, but they were definitely, you know, pretty active in it. And I'm guessing it's probably because, you know, that's where Keith was raised, I think born as well. So they probably assumed if he was on the run, right, he was going to go to his local areas. Authorities looked for Keith all throughout that Wednesday evening. They even searched Joanne's home in Mount Carmel, believing that maybe she was like hiding her son. The family had just visited her that past weekend, you know, but you know, they didn't find any signs of Keith there. They questioned her about her son, like where could he be, and this, that, and the other. They also asked her about the baby, which at that point in time, I do not believe Joanne like knew the specifics, so she had no idea what they were talking about. They were talking about like her grandson, Peter. She didn't know that Elaine had, you know, given premature birth, and they kept drilling her because they thought she knew where her son was. But she was confused, and when they told her what they suspected her son of doing, she was like, what the? No, there's no way. There's no way my son would ever do that. He loved his family. He wasn't a violent person. Like, no, there's got to be another explanation. Which again, right, like, if you're looking at this, right, without knowing any other facts and just looking at what, you know, you come across, right, I don't blame them for thinking that Keith had something to do with this. I mean, come on, like, we're all, into the true crime community and reading about true crimes. I mean, how often does the husband usually take out the family in family annihilator cases, right? And that's what a lot of people assumed this was. And, you also don't blame Joanne for saying, like, no, there's no way, because so often that happens, right? A lot of the times, people who are like that, they don't show that side of themselves to everyone, So yeah, of course, they run into, Keith's family saying there's no way he did that. His friends stood up for him and were like, no, he's not a violent guy. He's very happy with his life and his wife and his family, all that stuff. Like, there's nothing there. One of Keith's good friends that he had grown up with lived in Colorado at this time. His name was Kevin Davis. And police even tracked him all the way down in Colorado and asked him about Keith. And he said, quote, Keith was a real stand-up guy. When they first came to me and said they were looking for him because they thought he had murdered Elaine, I said, there's no way. That's not even a possibility. Kevin had actually been the best man at the Dardeens' wedding, so he knew them quite well. And he too was, adamant, like there's no way Keith did this. And all of Keith's family and friends just begged investigators, like, please start searching another angle, because there's no way he did this. There's just no way. And in fact, they were telling police that they feared he was dead as well. They're like, if his family is dead and like dead in the home, like, no, you should be worrying, like, if something happened to him, he's probably dead too. Police would continue searching for Keith all into the next day on Thursday, and they actually found his car very early that Thursday morning around 1:30 a.m. It was found parked near a bank and a police station in the nearby town of Benton, which was about 11 miles from Ina, specifically 11 miles south of the Dardeen home, outside of Ina. The vehicle was impounded, and inside, authorities found the interior splattered with blood, leading them to believe that someone had probably been shot inside the vehicle. I think kind of like the way the blood spatter looked led them to believe it was a gunshot as well. Police held another news conference around 4 p.m. that same Thursday. They were informing the public that Keith was officially their number one suspect in the deaths of his family, and they announced they were still looking for him. Jefferson County Sheriff's authorities announced that at that point there was a 3-part investigation going on, or I guess a 3-way investigation would be a better way to say that, going on at this point in time. And Jefferson County Sheriff Bob Pitchford said that there had been a task force that had been formed, and it included the Franklin and Jefferson County Sheriff's Departments, because they were pretty close to the county line, and the Illinois State Police with, as we said earlier, agents from the Division of Criminal Investigation, all working on the case together. And he announced that they had been beating the bushes all that evening and into that day, Thursday, looking for any signs of Keith. They hadn't found anything yet. However, later this same Thursday, November 19th, in the evening around 5:50 p.m., so approximately 2 hours after authorities held the press conference, Keith's body was found in a nearby wheat field. Other reports said it was a cornfield, but he was found in a nearby field by some hunters. And this field where he was discovered was only about 1.5 miles away from his home. It was near Rend Lake College in Ina, and it was reported that the field Keith's body was actually found in was actually near the Franklin and Jefferson County border, lying on County Line Road. Some reports further stated that Keith's body was actually lying a few feet into the Franklin County border. And since they were right near the college after making this gruesome discovery, God, I never want to find a body. That would be awful. But yeah, since they were near the college after they, discovered Keith's body, the hunters ended up tracking down a maintenance worker at the college, and they were able to summon authorities to the scene. Now, unlike his family, it would turn out Keith was not beaten to death, but shot to death. 3 times to be exact. Once in his skull, once on the right side of his face, and once through his left cheek. Although he had been bludgeoned with a blunt object similar in fashion to his family. So it looks like he had been, beaten, but he was ultimately shot to death. And on top of that, Keith's penis had been removed from his body, with some reports indicating that it had been removed post-mortem. Jefferson County Coroner Dr. Richard Garrettson, who would actually perform the autopsies on Elaine, Peter, and Casey, said, quote, it was absolutely definitely not a suicide in regards to Keith, because that was the, at first, that's what authorities were wondering, is like, oh, did he, kind of typical family annihilator, go and, kill his family and then kill himself? Dr. Garrettson, who, had intimate knowledge of the investigation, even if he didn't and perform Keith's autopsy, just told the public, like, look, all I can tell you is that it was definitely not a suicide. An eventual autopsy would find that Keith died only within an hour of his family, but ultimately, like, they could never definitively rule who had been killed first, his family or him, just that they did die within the same time frame. And as with his wife and son, there were no drugs or alcohol found in Keith's system. And when Keith's body was discovered that Thursday, authorities did not disclose that to the public at first, only saying that a body had been discovered and that it was unrecognizable. And as far as the public was aware, the hunt for Keith was still on. And there were actually fears that this third body found meant that there was like some psycho killer loose in the area. Remember, I said this area had already been plagued by a lot of homicides, like not all by the same person, but just a lot of violent crime. And so, yeah, when they found this like third body so close to when they found the family, people were like, oh my God, there's like a serial killer loose. What the hell? State Police Lieutenant Connell Smith, who did work for the Division of Criminal Investigation, declined to elaborate on the crime scene at all and declined to discuss anything in regards to suspects or motive. Quote, at this time, interviews are being conducted in an attempt to identify the movements of the victims and what had occurred. Now, residents were absolutely shocked at what had happened to the Dardeen family, all right? Especially the brutality of it, you know, like the mom and children being slaughtered, possibly the husband doing it, you know, like people were just completely like shocked. Neighbors who did know the Dardeens described them as, you know, a model family, that they never heard any disturbances or drama coming from them at all, and that they were, yeah, all around just normal looking average family. Their landlord, Joanne Settle, actually echoed these exact same sentiments when asked to speak about the family. Quote, they were a model family. I don't know what happened. I can't believe it. The Settles' daughter, Barbara, was deeply troubled about the murders. Like, it caused like some massive effects on the town that we'll get into. But she said, quote, it's horrible. I'm paranoid. To think there's some psycho loose in the area? I think the people are totally stunned and don't know what to say or do. They're numb. Jim Davenport, who owned the office supply store where Elaine worked, spoke of her as well. Quote, she was a jewel. I'm not saying that just because the poor girl is gone. She was an excellent employee, and it will be difficult for us to replace her. Connie Grimes was the Dardeens' postmaster, and actually the postmaster for the entire tiny town. And she expressed what many in the community were feeling at this point in time, which was fear. Quote, I didn't hardly go to sleep last night from thinking about this. You never know who or what might be out there. I think the whole community is in shock over this. Claudia Johnson, who remember owned the New and Used store in Ina, spoke about how the murders, though they produced fear, they did kind of make everyone sort of like huddle together more tightly. Quote, when it happens right here, everybody just starts taking care of everybody else. And she said the last time she had seen Elaine and Peter had been the weekend before they were murdered. They had come in for a Christmas photo, and Peter was dressed in a little red plaid shirt with a dark blue bow tie, and that was the last time she had seen them. She said, quote, they seemed to be a real happy little family. They would have been one of the last people that you would think this would happen to. We lay awake at night trying to figure this out and wondering if it's going to happen again. And it wouldn't be until Friday, November 20th, that authorities would, you know, let the public know that, like, hey, Elaine was pregnant and she actually did go into premature labor and the baby was killed as well. They didn't go into details, but that is when they let the public know, which of course just added to the gruesomeness of this horrible, horrible crime. By the next day, Saturday, November 21st, authorities finally disclosed to the public that yes, it was Keith's body that they had found Thursday. And they didn't say much, just that he had been killed, quote, totally different than that of his family. They were, refusing to say much else. Sheriff Pitchford said, quote, it was a surprise to me. He was a suspect in the homicides. And remember I said Dr. Gerritsen spoke about how, that it was definitely not a suicide? He spoke a little bit, but not much. Just saying that Keith hadn't been beaten to death like his family. Quote, it looks very much like he was killed elsewhere and dumped there. While Franklin County Coroner Robert Lewis, who would end up conducting the autopsy on Keith, said that he died from a massive brain injury, and that the deaths of the entire Dardeen family were, quote, as brutal a murder I've seen in 12 or 13 years. It is a savage crime. I've been associated with the coroner's office for more than a dozen years, and this is the worst I've seen. But he reiterated, quote, we're playing our cards pretty close right now, and stated that they were trying to determine at that point in time when Keith had been killed. Quote, it's very difficult to determine time of death in a case like this. But, of course, with the police saying little to nothing and just kind of trying to, settle everyone's fears, this being a very, very tiny, tight-knit community, of course, rumors started to spread. And it really didn't take long for even some facts to kind of leak out to the locals. Lloyd, who was the Dardeens' landlord, told the papers that he heard Keith had been shot in the chest and head. Additionally, since this was the 80s, and the crime was, especially vicious, what with, the little baby Casey and all. One of the earliest fears and rumors to spread was that the murder had been performed by Satanists or cultists. In fact, many local farmers came out and said that they had found that their animals' throats had been cut in the months leading up to the murders, which, just added to everyone's fear and paranoia. Lloyd said that he had heard about Satanist and occult activity in the northern part of Jefferson County, but not where they were at in Ina. An anonymous citizen told the papers, quote, we've been hearing things like this for the last 3 years. There are no cults around here, and it's starting to look that way to us. And Dr. Garrettson was trying to assuage the public's fears, all right? He saw that people were starting to freak out about this whole, Satanist cult thing, and he tried to, tell the public, look, dude, I can tell you, I can't say, a whole lot, but I can tell you that these murders, they weren't, ritualistic. They were brutal, but, they weren't lining up with known cult murders. So, everyone just needed to, chill out. He also denied that Keith's penis had been removed. That was a detail that police had not told the public, but that was one of the facts that leaked to the locals, that he had been castrated. And I think that also added to the Satanist, cultist fear, Garrettson did squash one rumor that said baby Casey had been cut out of Elaine, saying that, no, Casey was, born. She wasn't, dug out of Elaine's womb. Lewis, the Franklin County coroner, added, meanwhile, quote, someone either had a strong dislike for this family, or we have a first-class nut loose in this area. And Pitchford, trying to keep ahead of the rumors and trying to calm everyone down, simply said, quote, the only thing we can do right now is we're doing. We're interviewing people that visited the Dardeens and who knew them from work. We're waiting for the public to start calling, which they will. And he said that at that point in time, after everything they had learned about the Dardeen family, their reputation was, quote, in the community as far as we can find out, is outstanding. Pitchford also denied that they had found the murder weapon. A local paper called the Mount Vernon Register News had run a front page story about the baseball bat and how that had been the murder weapon, and Pitchford, probably trying not to, get too many details released to the public, denied that fact. And later that same Saturday, the only thing police would tell the public is that they believed whoever killed the Dardeen family in the trailer also killed Keith. But they had no suspects, no motives, and they were currently searching the area where Keith's body had been found for any type of clues. And, this is just sort of a side story that I came across in my research of this case, and just thought it was, just kind of adds to, the fucked upness of this whole thing. So on this same Saturday evening, a local paper called the Benton Evening News ran a front page picture that showed Keith's body lying out on a slab, draped with a sheet to about to his neck, so it was covered up to about here. And in the photo, a funeral parlor employee is bent over the body looking at it, and about 2/3 of Keith's head is visible in the photo, with, of course, the employee blocking the rest of the view. The picture was taken by the Benton Evening News' photographer, who had gained unauthorized access to the body. So the funeral director, Val Thomas, said that this incident occurred after he had left the funeral home. He had just embalmed Keith's body, and he decided to go home for dinner. And he left Keith's body in the custody of a funeral parlor employee, Dan Joplin. Dan was supposed to help officials from another funeral home who were going to come and transport Keith's body through a room, down an elevator, and to a garage where there was a van waiting to transport him. And I don't know what happened. I don't know if Dan is the employee in the photo that ran or what. All we know is that, this photo of Keith's body was then ran as a front page story. And it caused a lot of outrage, rightfully so. Now, Val tried to pin all the blame on the photographer, saying that, like, he had just marched through some unauthorized access doors that were clearly marked and just started taking photos. Quote, the photographer just followed through the door marked private authorized personnel only. He wasn't invited in. And he said he was, quote, just shocked when he opened the paper and, like, saw that photo. The funeral home's owner, Penry Siegel, other reports state that it was Penry Cochran. So, Penry was the owner of the funeral home, and she was away when this incident occurred. But she said that the photographer, quote, pushed his way into the preparation room, which is marked no admittance, authorized personnel only, private. It's really a horrible thing. I wish it had never happened. Ultimately, Val and Penry would be disciplined by a state agency, the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation, for allowing a just embalmed body to be photographed. Their licenses were also placed on probation for 1 year. Penry had her embalmer trainee and funeral director trainee licenses that were placed on probation for a year, and Val had his funeral director and embalmer licenses on probation for a year. Apparently, Penry's husband actually owned and operated the funeral home, but he had just recently passed when all this happened, so that's why Penry had trainee licenses. In the end, Penry was also fined $2,100 for allowing an unauthorized person into the embalming area and take a picture of a corpse, and for also signing death certificates and funeral contracts without the supervision of a licensed funeral director. Val was fined $100 in connection to the photo, and for practicing at the funeral home without his name being publicly displayed as required by state law. And I thought it was kind of weird with the contract things with Penry, because I thought Val had his, like, funeral director and embalmer licenses. So I don't know, maybe he wasn't, like, licensed to do the contract thing or what? I don't know, but that's how they were disciplined for this whole incident. The Dardeens' funerals were held the day after on Sunday, November 22nd, at Short Funeral Home in Mount Carmel, and they were buried at Graceland Cemetery in Albion. The services were conducted by Reverend Harold Merriweather, who had actually known Elaine since she was 9 years old, and he actually officiated the Dardeens' wedding. Anita, Keith's sister, spoke about how traumatic it was to see little Peter's body in the casket. Quote, he looked like a very old person who had abused his life and body to the maximum. He did not look like a 3.5-year-old. Whatever the killer did to the child that night, he stripped him of every feeling and emotion. Whatever innocence was in that 3.5-year-old was gone. Oh, and I read that quote and I was like, damn, dude, that's so tough. By this point in time, officials did come out and state that, yes, the murder weapon was the bloodied aluminum baseball bat, that it had been found, as had a tremendous amount of evidence that was found in the Dardeen trailer. By Tuesday, November 24th, police revealed to the public that Keith had been shot 3 times and verified that all the shots were to his head. They revealed the gruesome details of Elaine being beaten so hard that that's what made her go into premature labor, and that Casey was also beaten. Like, they disclosed those details to the public. And they said that they definitely knew that the murders were not performed by, like, Satanists or cultists. Lonnie Inlow was zone supervisor for the Illinois State Police that were based in Marion, and he said, quote, I've heard about that stuff practically since I've been in law enforcement, but I'm not personally aware of any of it. And he said police did not have any other bizarre explanations for the murders, though. Quote, it would be safe to say we will try to pursue all available channels. After a week had gone by and the public was asking for an update, Inlow said that they were working the case, but there was no arrest imminent. Quote, we're working fast and furious on it. I believe we're making progress, but progress is in the eye of the beholder. And after more than a week after the murders, the local area and the counties were still on edge. We mentioned this earlier, right? There had been 15 murders in only 2 years in Jefferson County alone. And the latest one occurred that July, like before the Dardeens. That latest one was in July. That was the 10-year-old girl. It was the one that, like, really spooked Keith. And at that point in time, like, that case was also unsolved. So now you have this new murder of this family, and police are saying they're not close to an arrest or anything, right? Like, that just kind of adds to the fear, like, oh my God, are any of these murders going to be solved? And it didn't help. So, like, not only was the community already on edge because of, like, a bunch of violent crime and stuff, it didn't help that, police were not releasing a whole lot of information. They had actually sealed all the search warrants in relation to the case, and just, were being very tight-lipped about what they knew, which just kind of allowed the spread of rumors and gossip, especially in this small community in town when, that's all anyone would talk about. And yeah, it just said it was not a very good time to be in Jefferson County. There was already that tension in the air, there, but like you started to see kind of outward signs of how this was affecting the town and the community. It wasn't uncommon to see people like openly displaying their guns in their gun racks as they drove in their trucks. After high school games that would lead into the evening, kids would wait in the gymnasium or the school building rather than like milling about waiting for their parents outside. And when the parents would come, they would walk into the building and escort their children back to their cars. Like that's how fearful everyone was. And in a community where like locking your doors, shutting your windows, all that stuff was like super unheard of, it quickly became the norm. Ruth Jeffries lived 4 houses down from the Dardeens, and she said, quote, "I didn't have any idea where my house keys were at. My doors were never locked. They're locked now." Another Ina resident named Ernie Rhines said, quote, "The little kids have nightmares. It's enough to give grown people nightmares. I think it's the most terrible thing that ever happened in this town. I hope they catch the folks that have done it. I really do." Connie, remember the Ina postmaster, said, quote, "I think everyone's still not at ease, and we didn't have as good a Thanksgiving as we could have otherwise. The fact that they didn't catch anybody, that still makes folks uneasy." A clerk who worked at the post office named Ruth Ann Crocker spoke about this fact right here, how the fact that like nobody was caught or even suspected is really what drove a lot of the fear. Quote, "Usually you can find something where someone has a grudge against them, the victims, but you don't find anything like that with this family." An anonymous citizen spoke about how the fear was sort of like having an effect on the community as a whole, you know? Quote, "We've heard everything. That's all they've talked about, of course. People are still scared to death in case they might come back." In fact, the fear and the rumors and the paranoia gripped the community so tightly, guys. It is said many citizens suffered like psychological effects from just like all the stress and the fear and worrying. Dr. Gerritsen, on top of being the Jefferson County coroner, was also a family physician, and he spoke about how a lot of his patients just wanted to talk about the murders. Quote, "Every other patient I see wants to talk about the killings in Ina." He said one patient of his lived just a half a mile down from the Dardeens, and that this patient had lost 14 pounds because of the stress and insomnia he was suffering. And he said, quote, "People are really afraid." The Dardeens' landlord's daughter, Barbara, remember I said that she was having a hard time? Yeah, she couldn't sleep at all. She was afraid to turn out the light at night, so she would stay up all night in her bedroom just reading. Definitely afraid to turn out the light. Lewis, the Franklin County coroner, said that all the fear was unjustified and that people were just succumbing to mass hysteria. And that's what was making people on edge. He said the case was being handled by, quote, "some of the best criminal investigators in the state." He insisted that everyone was just feeding off of everyone else's fear and paranoia, and that was really what was fueling all of it. Quote, "I don't think there's a rational basis for the near hysteria. The people are frightening each other." He spoke about how much the community had changed since the murders, talked about how a lot of people, especially in the rural areas, barricaded their doors at night, loaded up on guns and ammunition, and that everyone was just heavily armed and super paranoid, which did not make for a great combination. Quote, "I made up my mind that if my car runs out of gas out in the country, I'm not knocking on any doors. I'm going to walk to the nearest highway and thumb a ride," because he thought, like, yeah, due to people's fear and stuff, he would likely get shot than get help. He did try to quell some of the public fears by assuring the public that the investigation was being worked. Quote, "We're making good progress. This investigation is proceeding just exactly like it should be," saying that at this point in time, investigators had already interviewed over 200 people and that they had uncovered a lot of useful information, like a lot. They just couldn't disclose it to the public yet. And he said that they couldn't disclose like intimate details of like how the family was killed or what they had died from exactly. Quote, "I wish I could, but I can't. We're not trying to hide anything from the public, but the injuries sustained by Mr. Dardeen were different enough from the injuries sustained by the other family members that only the killer or someone involved in the investigation would know that. That is the reason we don't want to go into any depth on them." Like I said, Lewis was the one who performed Keith's autopsy, and all he said was Keith's cause of death was massive cerebral trauma. But he just wasn't at liberty to disclose what had caused it. So they could tell the people that, like, yeah, the family died from, blunt force trauma or whatever, but they were not releasing, like, any graphic details or intimate details. And Dr. Gerritsen, who had performed the other autopsies, had already confirmed that their deaths was blunt force trauma. By December Police still had no suspects, but they did say that they had received over 300 leads in the case thus far, and they assured the public they were tracking down each and every one of them. There was a man who was questioned on December 3rd for more than a few hours, but Franklin County Sheriff Charles Mandrell just said, quote, "He is no more of a suspect than anyone else. We told him we would like to talk to him, and he came in on his own. We did not go out and get him." And I guess the only reason they even wanted to talk to this man was based on, like, the description of a car that was seen in the general area of the murders. And the man was ultimately not arrested or charged and was released. A co-worker of Keith's, with whom he had been having a dispute shortly before the murders, was also interviewed and questioned, but they were also released and found to not be a suspect. Man, that would suck though, right? Like to having like probably some silly dispute, at work or whatever. And then, a coworker ends up dead and they question you, like, man, that would really suck. After about 2 or 3 weeks after the murders, Sheriff Pitchford admitted that they were stumped at this point. Quote, "We just don't know. We're at a loss." But he did stress that they did not believe the Dardeen murders were linked to any of the other murders that plagued the county, and that they were for sure not connected to any Satanist or cultist activity. Quote, "They were very brutal killings, but not ritual killings." Lewis proclaimed that not only were the Dardeen murders not connected to the other murders in the area, but that the family had been specifically targeted. Quote, "I believe it was a very personal, deliberate thing. The family was not chosen at random." He also reiterated that he believed Keith had died of head injuries, with other officials declaring no, it was the actual gunshot wounds that killed him, and they would have to wait for a pathologist report to confirm. There were also rumors that Keith had been dragged behind a car, but Lewis put a stop to that. Quote, "I have no reason to believe it is true, but he had very, very severe head trauma." He and other officials did theorize that Keith was actually killed at his home and then dumped to where his body was found. But, nobody could offer an explanation, why the killer would do this. Some wondered if maybe it was to, draw suspicion away from the real killer, because remember, everyone assumed it was Keith. Find the family killed, and then, the one family member who you can't find is missing and their car is missing, right? You put 2 and 2 together, and that's what you assume. But people are I don't know about that theory, though, because, wouldn't Keith's body had been more hidden? Why would you want Keith's body to be discovered, so quickly? Because he was kind of out in the open. He wasn't really hidden. The only thing everyone in the investigation could agree on was that the Dardeens had no known enemies, no known shady dealings or anything like that could explain why they would be targeted, to explain why this happened to them. Sheriff Pitchford said, quote, "Everything we have found out about these people has been good. By December 7th, a $10,000 reward leading to any information in the Dardeen's murder was offered up, and it was offered up by the American Publishing Company, which published 6 daily and 4 weekly papers all throughout Southern Illinois. President of the company, Larry Perotto, said, quote, "The reward money is a small investment in the possible solution of this crime. We want our readers to feel safe, but they don't and can't with this murder unsolved. Our only hope is that the person who has information concerning these crimes will now step forward and assist in the investigation." But unfortunately, nothing would be gained or learned from this reward offer. On December 23rd, the Dardeen surviving family members offered up their own $10,000 reward, with $20,000 being offered if the informant came forward before midnight on Christmas. Keith's sister, Anita Knapp, she was known as Anita Johnson at that time, said, quote, "It's Christmas and someone has taken the lives of my only brother, my sister-in-law, my only niece that we were so joyfully awaiting the arrival of, and my only nephew. Please make this Christmas more bearable for us by turning in any information you may have." Rick Hobler was the attorney who was handling the Dardeen's estate, and he was also representing the remaining family members. And he said the family finds it, quote, "somewhat inconceivable that 4 people in Ina could be brutally murdered without someone knowing something, although that is a possibility, I guess." He said that the family hoped with it, being Christmas and all, the spirit of giving and all that, coupled with the cash reward, someone would come forward with something. Quote, "and give the Dardeen family some peace at Christmas time by knowing the person has been arrested or is being sought." And said the family was discouraged by the lack of any new leads. Quote, "They felt like this may be a way to instill yet some other person to come forward." And he said that the family hadn't come forward with this reward before because they wanted to make sure that they had the funds to actually reward it, or fund it. I guess that's the proper way to say that. So sometimes it's hard to talk and do this at the same time. Sheriff Pitchford said, quote, "Each and every one of us has a conscience. I believe with this amount of money that is available, this will open up some consciences. It is a hard case. We will solve this case." Consciences. That was kind of hard to say. Now, at this point in time, over 600 leads had been tracked down and traced, but it had led to nothing. Master Sergeant Ken Clore, who was an investigator with the Division of Criminal Investigation, said that they had chased down every single tip and lead that had ever come in. Quote, "At this point, we have sufficient information coming in. We're generating our own leads." He said for anyone to come forward if they had any intimate knowledge of the family, including their background or their friends, and to bring it to them so that they could evaluate it for significance. Quote, "One piece of information may not be important to the individual, but it may be something that leads us down the right path." He said by this point in time, authorities were working with the theory that the family was killed by someone they knew, though they did not discount the possibility of it being a random attack. On January 13th, 1988, it was officially ruled that Keith died from the gunshot wounds, with the Franklin County coroner's jury impaneled by Lewis returning a homicide verdict in Keith's cause of death. And apparently, because I looked up, I was like, a coroner's jury? What the hell is that? A coroner's jury apparently is impaneled when they need help, like, assessing the manner or cause of death. Dr. Stephen Neurenberger was a pathologist from Collinsville, and he testified that it was the actual gunshot wounds that had killed Keith. Which I just thought was kind of like a weird distinction. Like, I get it for, like, medical reasons and stuff. Like, you need the record to be, you know, as correct and complete and thorough as possible. But I just thought it was weird because I know Lewis said that, like, oh, it was the head trauma, but it's like, yeah, he was shot in the head. So, like, yeah, the gunshot wounds, but, like, wouldn't it technically be, like, head trauma as well? I don't know. I thought that was kind of weird. And though the reward offers had produced leads, none of them led to anything substantial. And they didn't produce any new information for authorities to go on. And on February 10th, a Jefferson County coroner's jury also returned a homicide verdict in the deaths of Elaine, Casey, and Peter. Dr. Garrettson testified, since he was the one who had performed the autopsies, that he believed the family was taken by utter surprise by someone they knew, or were overpowered, quote, by someone with weapons, citing the lack of any, like, struggle or fight inside the home. He also stated that the blows that Elaine, Peter, and Casey had suffered had been administered by a, quote, strong person or persons, and that Keith had probably been killed either right outside the home in his car, or in the home with his family, and then driven to where he was found. That seemed to be the prevailing theory, that Keith was not actually killed where he was found. And now, we've talked a little bit about the investigation, but let's really kind of dig into it and see what police had found. So, like we said, the local police from Jefferson and Franklin counties teamed up with the Illinois State Police, and there would be a total of 30 detectives assigned to the case full-time. Over 100 people would be interviewed and ultimately released throughout the course of this investigation. And like we said, numerous leads would be tracked down. I saw one report that said, like, this case had over 1,000 leads that the police tracked down. So, you know, like with most murder investigations, police started with digging into the family. Like, what, is there anything in the family that could explain this? An affair, illicit drug use, an addiction of some kind, you know? Like something. Money troubles, right? Like something. Like that's kind of like your standard 101, right? Like, yeah, look into the family and see if there's anything going on in their lives that could explain why or how this happened to them. But police could never find anything on either Keith or Elaine's part. They couldn't even find anyone to say anything negative or scandalous about the family. And even though they had found that small amount of marijuana in the Dardeen trailer, because everyone's systems came back clean, they ruled out any possible theory of drug dealing or even drug use on either of their part. Plus, yeah, the amount of marijuana, it was super tiny. And in fact, some police theorized that maybe the marijuana had been dropped inadvertently by the killer, or killers, because at this point, they weren't sure if it was one person or multiple people. A neighbor did tell police that the family were visited by weekend guests, usually a lone man, as often as once a month, all throughout their time of living in Ina. He said he couldn't identify them, but he was pretty sure it was a different man every time. This neighbor said Elaine sometimes mentioned the visitors to him when they talked. Quote, she'd cut her eyes up at me and give almost a quizzical type of smile and say another one of Keith's friend is over for the weekend. I wish I knew if she meant anything by that. And this could be what led them to pursue the drug angle as well. But again, they never found anything to link the family with any type of drugs. And that was either using or dealing. Could find no connections whatsoever. They found no evidence of an affair on either Keith or Elaine's part, and neither had any shady dealings or like shady past dealings that could explain the murders either. They had found a small stack of papers inside the trailer with some sports scores written on them, which kind of led them to like think like, oh, did Keith maybe have a gambling problem? Maybe he incurred like some sort of gambling debts of some sort, you know? But Joanne argued against this, saying that her son was so frugal and so adamant about saving for Peter's college fund that he actually resold cans of soda at work for 50 cents. And they could also find no evidence of like questionable financial activity in their accounts. They found no evidence of any gambling debts or anything like that. And after Keith's body was found, and then they determined that the family had all been killed within like an hour of one another, that just led police to more questions, not answers. They wondered like, okay, why was Keith killed away from his family? Or was he? Was he killed with them? Was he killed inside the home? Outside the home? Was he kidnapped from somewhere else? Did he know about his family's fate and vice versa? Another thing that was strange is that the crime scene was somewhat staged, which you could probably gather from what I described earlier, right? How they were all tucked into the waterbed in the back. But it was more than that. Police found evidence of cleanup, like some of the blood had been cleaned up, and yeah, it just indicated that the killer had spent some time in the home and that they did not feel a sense of urgency to leave. And this led them to further theorize that this attack probably happened in the dark, like maybe sometime between Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. The trailer was on Route 37, which was a busy state highway, but at the time of the murders, the Dardeen's trailer could be seen by Interstate 57, 2,000 feet to the west. And at this point in time, Interstate 57 was a known main line for drug trafficking. So I wonder if that would also helped them kind of pursue the drug angle for a little bit. That seemed to be the one theory that they chased the most, was some sort of possible drug angle, but no matter how they came at it, they couldn't find anything to tie the family to any type of drug activity. Another factor that really made this case very difficult for law enforcement to work was the fact that they could never come up with a motive. They didn't think robbery was a motive because there was a VCR, a portable camera, like a home video camera, jewelry, and cash that had been left behind in the Dardeen home, and it was out in plain view. So if you were there to rob, you would definitely take those things, but they had just been left alone. And apparently robberies were another form of crime that was very popular in this area. Apparently, I think due to the interstate roads, it was common for like thieves to actually come from bigger areas like St. Louis, Missouri, and like surrounding cities and travel to far away rural communities and do robberies there. But yeah, with all that valuable stuff left behind, they ruled out robbery as a motive. They also ruled out any kind of sexual motive, since Elaine, Peter, and Keith had not been sexually assaulted, even though Keith's penis being removed was definitely like a question mark for them. And I have seen some later articles saying that like Elaine was sexually assaulted, but yeah, all the newspaper articles that I could find, yeah, it said that like it was not a sexually motivated crime, and like, yeah, no one was like sexually assaulted or anything. The only sexual component that I could find in news reports and articles had to do with the removal of Keith's penis. And remember, Lewis had put out the thought that the Dardeens had been like purposely targeted, and a few people had put out this theory actually, and police did entertain that theory, but they were also working with the belief like, okay, if it wasn't a random attack and it wasn't targeted, maybe it was a case of mistaken identity. But that's the problem with not having an established motive, right? Like, motive is pretty important. It kind of tells you which way to start pursuing the investigation, right? But like, they could find nothing that would explain like, why would this family be killed? Like, I don't understand. And with nothing concrete, no leads, no evidence, no motive established, no suspects, it didn't take long for the case, unfortunately, to grow cold. And 1 year after the murders, they still had no new leads or clues. Quote, any closer to a suspect or an arrest? No, we don't see that around the corner. And this was according to Jefferson County Sheriff's Captain Mike Anthus, who now headed the investigation. Quote, it's one of those situations. It could be tomorrow, next week, next month. You don't know. It may be another year from now. It's kind of like working a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. He was being assisted by Lieutenant Fred Smith of the Division of Criminal Investigation and Franklin County Sheriff's Detective Sergeant John Moore. Anthus said that though they did not have an established motive, he was convinced, quote, there's a person or persons who have some type of information who's thinking, I don't want to get involved, urging anyone to come forward. Quote, it kind of looks like the middle-class all-America family, and you look at it and wonder, why would somebody do this? Moore added, quote, it's a hard one. I guess people think we go to bed at night and forget about it. We don't. He talked about how they still, after all this time, after a year, did not even have an established motive. Quote, I could give you 10 reasons today, and you could come back tomorrow, and I could give you 10 different ones. In fact, they still weren't even sure if this was a targeted crime or a random attack. And they weren't even sure if this had been committed by a local or somebody passing through. There were police officers throughout the years who had like their quote-unquote gut feelings that the perpetrator lived within a 20-mile area radius of Ina, but that's all they had was like their gut feelings. There was no evidence to pinpoint conclusively to one way or another. And interestingly enough, the article that talks about the 1-year anniversary of the murders states that the gun used to kill Keith and the blunt object used to kill the family had not been found. So I didn't know if that was like an error or what, because I read earlier reports that said like the baseball bat was found. I don't think they ever found the gun that killed Keith. But yeah, just thought that was weird. Maybe that was a typo. But what we do know for a fact is that even after all this time, a year later, police were still keeping things to themselves and not informing the public, including the fact that, Keith's penis had been removed. Remember, we said this earlier, there were rumors about town about that fact. But the police had never officially come out and publicly said, yeah, that is true. Hobler, who remember was the Dardeens family attorney, said that though the family was still frustrated with any lack of updates, they were satisfied with the investigation and the work that investigators were doing. Quote, there's not been a giving up of hope. The families are religious families, and they both believe that their prayers will be answered. They're convinced that something that's right will happen. They're obviously still very upset about what happened. They're concerned that the person who's done this is doing this to other families and might be contemplating doing it to them. It's a fear of the unknowns at this point. And even though it had been a year since the murders, there was still a little bit of tension in the local communities. That fear had never fully subsided. In fact, a lot of people thought that the local community and attitude of the locals changed after this. Before, it was thought that this community was kind of open, especially to strangers, very hospitable. But after this, everyone was more cautious, more guarded, especially around non-locals. Quote, it's unbelievable that it could be somebody walking the streets and you might know him. And this was according to Joan Sneed, who owned the Ina Cafe. Another anonymous citizen said, quote, people were really trusting here. After that happened, that trust isn't there anymore. 5 years after the murders. 5 years? The investigation was in the exact same place as it had been. They still did not have a motive or a suspect. Anthus said, quote, the thing that makes this case baffling is that you can't come up with a direct motive. We use this case to teach our investigators to avoid tunnel vision because you have to consider every possible theory. Joanne, Keith's mother, had posited her own theories at this point, and she posited that the killer was someone Keith knew and that maybe he had brought home, and she thought the killer left with Keith from the trailer and then killed him for some unknown reason before returning to the trailer to kill Elaine and Peter. But she did hold out hope that one day her son's case would be solved. Quote, police tell me they're hoping whomever did it will have one drink too many in a tavern and say something. It's just been so hard to accept. Very hard. We've gone over the same stuff over and over again. It's so unreal they were murdered because of the type of people they were. Joanne tried to keep her son's case alive throughout the years and tried very hard to keep media attention on the case. Quote, they told us in the beginning that we need to keep the story out there. We need to keep it going. We need to keep rolling. She had no idea who could have killed her son and his family, what the possible motive could be. She posited other theories throughout the years that maybe someone wanted Keith to sell drugs and he refused. Quote, I think someone wanted Keith to sell drugs and he refused. Or maybe it was possible someone had the hots for Elaine and she spurred their advances. Quote, or there's a possibility someone liked Elaine and she would not accept his advances and he took out his rage on both of them. We just don't know. All throughout the 1990s, Joanne would call the one detective that was still assigned to the case case full time and just kind of get an update, share with him maybe some rumors or gossip she had heard around town. And she would never give up, guys. Like, I always admire parents and family members who can do this after suffering such a traumatic loss, is do everything they can to further the investigation and not let the case grow cold. Like, I admire that so much. That's incredible. For the 10-year anniversary, 10 years, guys, the 10-year anniversary of her son and his family's death, she wrote an op-ed in the local paper, the Daily Republican Register, which was a local paper in Mount Carmel, and it read, quote, "Dear editor, 10 years ago on November 17th, 1987, my son, Russell Keith Dardeen, and his family were brutally murdered. The person or persons responsible for their deaths have never been captured. The Department of Criminal Investigation is still actively working on their murder. I will never give up hope. I appreciate everything you have done in the past 10 years to help me. I believe that one day I will receive a call saying the search is over." She petitioned numerous crime shows and daytime talk shows to cover the story, and she had even gathered 3,000 signatures to petition the Oprah Winfrey Show to do a story on her son's case in 1994, but the producers declined it, saying that they thought the details, even without going into graphic detail, were just too graphic for daytime television. And the producers of America's Most Wanted had a similar reaction that same year in 1994, but a few years later, in 1998, they had a change of heart and they ended up airing an episode about the Dardeen case in November of 1998. At the time, Joanne said, quote, "Way down inside, I feel like something is going to happen. It's odd to say, but I feel lucky about this. I just feel like this is the last chance. If nothing comes of it, I've done everything I can do. After that, it'll take someone coming forward on their own to solve this case." And unfortunately, this segment did nothing to garner any new leads or information. In 1999, there was a serial killer that authorities were interested in looking at, and it was serial killer Angel Maturino Resendez, who was then known by his alias, Rafael Resendez Ramirez. And he had surrendered himself to authorities in Texas. He had traveled the country using freight trains, and he would target people who lived near railroad tracks, and his MO was to beat people to death. And it is said, even though the local authorities did try to pursue this angle, they could never find anything that would tie him to the Dardeens. Then, on December 31st, 1999, now infamous serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells cut the throats of two girls near Del Rio, Texas. 13-year-old Kayleen Harris unfortunately died, but the other girl, 10-year-old Crystal Searles, survived, and she would ultimately help police identify him. He was captured and arrested on January 2nd, 2000 in Del Rio, and he was arrested on capital murder charges. And shortly after his arrest, Tommy began confessing to numerous other crimes and murders he had committed all across the country. He cited he had jumped freight trains and hopped ride with truckers as his primary modes of transportation, and he stated that he had killed in numerous states. And on March 2nd, 2000, as he's behind bars waiting for his trial, he confessed to the Dardeen family murders. And at that point in time, he had confessed to 8 other murders, 13 people across 7 states. Spokesman for the Texas Department of Public Safety, Tom Vinger, said, quote, "He claims that he has found religion and wants to bring some closure to the families of his victims, hence his confessions." Now, Tommy said that he could not recall all of the details of his crimes, claiming it was a coping strategy he had developed after being sexually abused as a child. But he said he did remember quite a lot of details about the Dardeen murders. He said at that time he was primarily living in St. Louis, Missouri, about 90 miles from Jefferson County, Illinois, and he said he earned money by working at a carnival as a day laborer and also worked the fair circuit, and when that didn't pay the bills enough, he resorted to stealing. Like I said, Tommy would travel the freight trains or take rides with truckers, and that's how he primarily got around the country. And he said it was through this kind of traveling that he became familiar with the Jefferson County area, specifically the Ina area. He claimed that one night in November of 1987, he was in Jefferson County, and he met Keith Dardeen at a truck stop, and this truck stop was near Mount Vernon. Later, he would say he actually met Keith in a pool hall in Jefferson County. Tommy then said after initially meeting, Keith invited him over for dinner, to which he accepted. Tommy said the meal went well, and by the end of it, he was getting ready to move on like he always did, but then Keith supposedly sexually propositioned him, and that triggered Tommy's rage. In another retelling, he said that Keith had wanted a threesome with him and Elaine. Tommy said he was so angry at this that he whipped out his gun, held Keith at gunpoint, forced him outside and into his car, and forced him to drive him to where he would be found. And it was there that he shot and mutilated him. Tommy said he then drove back to the Dardeens' trailer to kill Elaine and Peter because they were witnesses. He later claimed that he killed them because he had uncontrollable rage and anger, and that Keith had triggered this by sexually propositioning him. And it is said that Tommy was extremely sensitive to how he was treated, and he was triggered very easily. And Tommy said that it was this uncontrollable rage that explained why he even beat preemie baby Casey. In yet another retelling, Tommy omitted the encounter with Keith and the sexual proposition altogether, and said that he was actually traveling a freight train the night of the murders, and he hopped off near Ina. He came upon the Dardeens' trailer, saw the for sale sign out in front, and figured that this would be a prime location for a murder. After downing a few beers and waiting for the most opportune time, Tommy said he then went to the trailer and knocked on the door, and a weary Keith answered it. Tommy said that he told Keith that he was interested in buying the trailer before he then overpowered Keith at the door. Once inside, Tommy said that he made Keith bind and gag his wife with duct tape, and after that, Tommy said he then forced Keith to drive him where his body would ultimately be found. He said he sliced Keith's penis off, telling him that he was going to take it back to Elaine. Then he shot him and left him in the field. He said he then went back to the trailer where he sexually assaulted Elaine, then beat Peter, Elaine, and then baby Casey. And then he said after he cleaned up the scene a bit, he drove Keith's car to Benton to where it would be found. Later, in another retelling, Tommy omitted all of his previous statements and said that all these other stories he had told of how he had met Keith or not met him were just curveballs that he had thrown at police in order to distract them from the real reason he was in Ina, which he said was organized crime. He said it wasn't a coincidence that Keith's car had been found near a police station in Benton. Right next to this police station was a courthouse. And at the time of the events of the murder, there was some large, drug conspiracy trial that had been prosecuted by federal prosecutors, and it had just wrapped up. And now, according to Tommy, somehow, somewhere, some way, someone connected Keith to the drug trial, but Tommy would never state how or why or elaborate on these details. All Tommy would say that this all eventually involved him. And he told Bill Clutter of Investigating Innocence, who was granted numerous jailhouse interviews with Tommy. In one of their interviews, quote, "When you step in the ballpark, you better be ready to play. You bring yourself down, your wife down, even your kids. He's lucky it stopped at his family." Bill had been granted numerous interviews with Tommy because he was trying to determine, if there were any other murders Tommy was tied to, and if they could, solve any other cold cases that were around. And in, one of their interviews, the Dardeens had come up. Quote, "Sells told me that those victims were targeted, that if they searched the woods near the trailer, they would have found a pile of beer cans where he waited and watched. I believe he went into the trailer and took control of Ruby and the 3-year-old son, duct taped their hands, and waited for Keith to come home." And for Bill, he believed Tommy was the Dardeens' killer, and it was based on this one little fact that Tommy said that he saw in the Dardeen home. Tommy described some watermelon ceramics that the Dardeens had in their home. And it was the fact that he divulged this that made Bill and a lot of other investigators believe that Tommy was indeed the killer of the Dardeen family. The knowledge about these ceramics was not public knowledge. Quote, "For him to know that, he had to have been inside that house. I am convinced he is the Dardeen killer." That one detail that he was able to give. Now, there are many others, however, who doubt Tommy is the actual killer. And what complicated it further was that there were many who thought that Tommy was just confessing to maybe some crimes that he did do and other crimes that he didn't do in order to avoid a death penalty that he was facing at that time. And they thought he's just trying to delay the inevitable, delay his death sentence, or perhaps get it commuted to life so that, he could offer all this information on these cold cases. And apparently he did make a habit of doing this. He was also known to add details to his stories. And when he was first arrested and he was first confessing to all these murders, he was trying to sell them for $100 each on those disgusting true crime memorabilia sites and shit. Yeah. And one of those stories he was trying to sell was the Dardeen murders. Other authorities dispute that Tommy even knew intimate details about the case at all, and said that all he ever talked about were things that he could have gleaned from public accounts. And these people said that when he was asked about more lesser known things or things that were only known to investigators, Tommy was a lot less reliable. The seat in which he had shot Keith was belied by evidence. And when asked how Elaine's body was positioned, he at first answered incorrectly before, like, all of a sudden saying the correct answer, and some thought that he had just gotten lucky. In total, Tommy would admit to about 70 murders, but authorities in Texas could only definitively attribute about 22 of those murders to Tommy, and not one of those is the Dardeen case. Tommy was ultimately found guilty of the murder of Kayleen and the attempted murder of Crystal in Texas, and he would ultimately be sentenced to death. Now, as he was awaiting his execution date, the authorities in Illinois wanted to transfer Tommy up there and see if they could maybe work the Dardeen case with him as their suspect. Tommy also said that he could supposedly lead them around Ina and point them to other undisclosed evidence that hadn't been, like, discovered or something. And so the Illinois authorities wanted to get him, transferred up there, but the Texas authorities were, like, not playing ball. They're like, oh, hell no. And they cited a state law that says death row inmates cannot go outside the state. By November of 2004, the Jefferson County State's attorney was trying everything in their power to get Tommy transferred there, but Texas was still refusing to play ball and was not allowing Tommy to leave the state. Tommy Lynn Sells was never officially charged in the Dardeen family murders, and in April of 2014, he was finally executed by the state of Texas. A week after his execution, Jefferson County State's attorney Douglas Hoffman said that though Tommy was never officially charged for the Dardeen murders, he was the number one suspect. And Jefferson County Sheriff Roger Mulch agreed with this assessment. Mulch had apparently interviewed Tommy in his cell in Texas, I think a couple of times, and he too claimed that Tommy knew details of the case that was not made public. And he specifically cited that fact about the watermelon ceramics. Quote, "In our minds, we have enough confidence to believe he did it." Finger added, quote, "He knows details about the crime scenes that have never been reported. We're not just taking his word for this." Texas Ranger John Allen, who had extensively interviewed Tommy behind bars several times, said, quote, "At no time has he ever lied to us. We have gone out of our way to catch him in a lie, which we cannot do. I don't think he will ever reach a point where he tells a lie. He has had an opportunity to be off alcohol and drugs and apparently develop a conscience." But it wasn't just authorities who were sort of like arguing back and forth like, well, is he the killer? Is he not? Does he know intimate details? Does he not? The Dardeens' family and friends were also a little hesitant about accepting Tommy's confession. Over the years, they doubted all of Tommy's stories. Like, first of all, Keith inviting some guy that he just met home. They're like, nah, that doesn't track at all. They certainly didn't believe that Keith would make any type of homosexual advancement towards Tommy since, as far as they knew, and that Keith ever exhibited, he was straight, he wasn't gay or bisexual. They didn't believe that he would ever proposition Tommy with a threesome, saying like that was so not in his purview. And then they also pointed to the fact that Tommy was known to add details to his crimes, which I think is what made it kind of more difficult to attribute like the crimes that he did do versus the ones he didn't do. And then when Tommy, remember, was talking about like the drug connection, like organized crime, and insinuating that like Keith was somehow involved, they also denied this. It was like, Keith was not into drugs at all. And when Tommy first confessed back in 2000, everyone pretty much took him at his word. When he had claimed that Keith had invited him in the home for dinner, Joanne Settle, remember the Dardeen's landlord, she had no problems believing that. Quote, "They were lovely people, religious church-going people. I'm sure they were trying to help him." Joanne, Keith's mother, also took Tommy at his word at first. Quote, "I could cry and laugh. I'm just thrilled to death to finally have an answer. It feels like a big ton of bricks have been lifted off of me. I've always believed it would be solved." But she still wanted to know why. Quote, "We would like to know why. We would like to know how it went down, but we know we may not get those answers." But by 2007, Joanne was starting to have just a little bit of doubts of Tommy's confession and that he was her son's killer. Quote, "I believe Tommy Lynn Sells did it. I just want to be 100% sure. I just keep trying to dig up more information about him. This one detective I work with would like for us to travel to Texas to see if Tommy would agree to meet with us. If I could have one face-to-face conversation with him, then I'd be more satisfied that he was the one who killed my son and his family." But she knew that was unlikely, as a top official Texas Ranger had told her and the Illinois authorities there was, quote, "no way in hell" that Tommy was going to leave the state and that they weren't even going to let him give a statement, let alone stand trial in Illinois. Joanne at this point was also having doubts because there was another serial killer that some wondered if he wasn't the one who had killed the Dardeens. It was serial killer Bruce D. Mendenhall, and he was actually from Albion, from where Elaine had been raised. Quote, until he was arrested and started making news, I never gave him a thought. Then word was sent to me that Mendenhall had once lived next door to Elaine's mom and dad, and he wasn't that much older than Keith. Could there be a connection? And get this. She spoke about how people told her, 20 years later, that it was wrong for her to question Tommy's confession. It had been 20 years. Couldn't she just let it go? Yeah, she said actual people told her this, and she had a response for them. Quote, it makes me mad when they say that. I'm just not 100% sure that Tommy Lynn Sells killed my son. The story he tells does not add up to what actually took place. If it were your son, wouldn't you want to know? If he's not the one, then there's somebody still out there. I just need to know. By 2008, the Dardeen case was still officially open and unsolved, with Illinois authorities saying that they were still going to work the case until they had someone to go on trial, whether that was Tommy or someone else. At the end of that year, Joanne said that she was 99% sure that Tommy had killed her son and his family, but there was still that doubt. She said she had written Tommy letters in prison requesting that he allow her to come visit her because she just needed to talk to him face to face. But she never received any response from these letters. She also said that she was in contact with another person in the prison, and that person had told her that they had talked to Tommy, and he said, yeah, I'm the one that killed the Dardeen family, but I don't want to meet Joanne because what would I say to her? But that wasn't good enough for Joanne. Quote, I need him to tell me face to face that he's the one who killed them, and I want him to tell me exactly what he did to them. And by this point in time, no execution date had been set for Tommy because his lawyers were trying to get his sentence commuted to life in prison due to mental defect. But Joanne did express that she wanted to be there when Tommy was finally executed. Quote, he doesn't want to die. Now, it didn't bother him to kill all those people, but he doesn't want to die and is doing everything he can to try and stop it. I would like to be there for the execution. I don't think it will bother me in the least. Maybe it sounds like I'm cold-hearted, but when I stop and think about everything, her and that baby, and how brutally they were all murdered, it's been over 20 years. But you don't forget. Your mind wanders on it. I think I will probably feel like it's finally over with. Cold-hearted? No, of course, Joanne, you don't sound cold-hearted. Are you kidding me? No, of course not. This asshole probably killed her, her son and his family. I don't think that's a cold-hearted way for her to think at all. Before he would be executed, Tommy did say, quote, I know people have their doubts. They say there's no physical evidence tying me to the Dardeens, but there wasn't for any of them because they weren't looking for me. I moved. I was always a transient. And by the time Tommy was finally executed, Joanne publicly claimed that she didn't really believe his confession. Gary Duncan, who was Jefferson County's top prosecutor until he retired in 2008, also doubted Tommy's claims. Quote, in claiming he was to blame for the Dardeen family's demise, Sells accurately described certain details of the massacre, some of which he could have gleaned from media accounts. When quizzed about details never made public about how Elaine Dardeen's body was found, Sells initially replied inaccurately, then blurted out the right response. It's possible he merely deduced the right answer. There was a lot of ambiguity in his claims, but there was also nothing about what he said that would make his guilt completely discountable. And he talked about how Tommy had offered to travel to Illinois and show them that he knew the area and show them where supposed evidence was, but that Texas, wasn't playing ball. Quote, it became clear Texas was not going to let him leave the state, and that left him as a prosecutor in a stalled position. Duncan said that it is possible Tommy is the real killer, but there's, quote, a fair possibility that the actual killer may still be out there. It's that kind of case that will haunt everyone involved. There's just no end to that. And that, boys and girls, was the tale of the Dardeen family who was brutally murdered. And now, of course, I have to ask you, what do you all think? Do you think Tommy Lynn Sells could have killed the Dardeen family? I have to admit, I genuinely do not know. I didn't do a thorough deep dive on Tommy because, he's a very infamous serial killer. There's a lot of information out there. I wanted to focus on the Dardeen family in this case, and there was already a lot to get into. But yeah, without knowing anything about Tommy or anything like that, yeah, I think there's certainly a big question mark there. Did he kill them? The fact that this fool added details to stories and confessed to crimes that he didn't, I know that there was one or two that he confessed to, but he was officially ruled out as doing those through DNA. So yeah, I don't know. That's what makes assholes like that really hard to believe and figure out, right? Is that like he's mixing lies and truth. At least that's what it seemed like from the brief research that I did. Like I said, wanted to steer clear of actual information about Tommy. Maybe I can do a video about him sometime. But yeah, the ceramics thing is that's certainly odd. I'm trying to think if that's something that he could have gotten from papers. There were a bunch of locals who talked to the papers and stuff like that. I don't know. Yeah, it certainly is a question mark. And so, yeah, I gotta ask y'all, do you think Tommy Lynn Sells murdered the Dardeen family? Do you think another killer could have done it? Like, what do you all think? What do you all think? I know everyone online, I mean, it's really funny too, because online, there's usually like a general consensus from people online. This one, there's a complete mixture. There are people who are adamant that Tommy Lynn Sells is the Dardeen's killer. And there are people who are equally adamant that like, nah, man, I think someone else did it. I don't think it was him. And I know the fact that, Keith's penis was removed. The people who don't believe it was Tommy, they wonder if there's some sort of like affair or like love connection, because that's a very, right, intimate, personal thing to do. The fact that Keith was killed so much more differently than his family. Yeah, it's certainly bizarre, man. It's certainly bizarre. I don't know. I have a hard time believing that though, because like the police really dug into this family, guys. Like surely they would have found something suspicious, right? I don't know. Maybe Tommy is the killer. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this case solved? Officially, it is still open. All right. So officially, no one has been charged or anything like that. So officially, the case is still open, but there are some who are like, nah, this has been solved. It was Tommy Lynn Sells. He admitted it. He knows intimate details. It totally fits within his MO. And yeah, case solved. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it to you. What do you all think? Please tell me your thoughts. I'm dying to know what y'all think about this case, because I was left flummoxed. Completely perplexed. Like, the fact that nothing weird or shady could be found in the family's history, that certainly leads to maybe Tommy killing them, right? Like some random attack by some drifter serial killer. I don't know, man. But yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and leave it this week with that. Please tell me your thoughts. Email me case suggestions. I love digging into cases that I've never heard of. Some of you have like a personal connection to some of these cases, and that really, like touches my heart. And yeah, if there's one that you would like me to tackle, go ahead and shoot me an email. I've already got my long list. And I don't know how if it's going to show on camera, but like I accidentally was blowing my brush and some of my sparkles spread everywhere. So I hope that wasn't like visible on camera or anything. It went up like that everywhere. So it's not dandruff, it's sparkles. So yeah, I hope you enjoy your Halloween season. You guys watching any spooky movies this season? I'll admit I've dropped the ball hardcore. I haven't watched any Halloween crap because me and Jeff are right in the middle of a One Piece marathon. Yes, we're almost to episode 1000. So that is what I have been distracted with. Let me know, what are you guys watching? Do you got some Halloween movies that you watch every year? Let me know. And next time that we meet, I almost said next week, next time that we meet, it will be Halloween. What the hell? Yes, we will be having an episode on Halloween. It's so awesome. It's a really freaky case I've got for you. It's from the 40s, and much like with this one, it is unsolved. All right, I will finally let you go. Have a wonderful 2 weeks. Enjoy the fall season. I hope you stay happy and healthy out there. Remember, when you're out there in the world, don't be a douche. Don't be a dick. Just be your lovable self. Leave a little sparkle wherever you go. And I will see y'all in 2 weeks for Halloween. Bye-bye.